Ballyfermot Heritage Group, so we'd like to say thank you very much for organising the talk. Our guest speaker tonight is Antoine Giacometti of Archaeology Plan, Antoine, and Ruth Johnson of City Council is beside Antoine. Antoine will discuss the excavations of Ballyfermot at the Salle, which has shed light on Ballyfermot's ancient past. So just before we begin, I would like to make a few safety announcements. So just in the case of an emergency, the fire exit is up the small stairs to the right-hand side. You may have noticed there's like 2 or 3 little steps on the right-hand side there, or on your left if you're sitting here. You just go up those steps, and to the right-hand side there's double doors, you go through them, and that's where the fire exit is. However, you can also go back out the front door if you think that you would prefer to do that, but hopefully that doesn't happen. And then, of course, alternatively, as I said, you can exit through the main doors. The toilets are at the front of the library on the left-hand side. And also, I could just ask if you can put mobile phones on silent, please, just for the duration of the talk. And then, so that's everything from me. I would like to hand you over now to Thomas Murphy of the Ballyfermot Heritage Group. So thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Murphy. I'm one of the 16 members of the Ballyfermot Heritage Group, voluntary collective formed in 2003 to explore and raise awareness of Ballyfermot's rich culture and heritage. The discovery of the former De Salle lands that we're going to uncover now tonight is an exciting one for the Heritage Group, not only because the majority of our members were actually past pupils, and proud past pupils of the De Salle, but we're also natives of Ballyfermot. It's very important for everyone in Ballyfermot. But little did we know as we ran around the expansive playing fields in De Salle on our sports days when we were playing GAA, or when we were just running around the place on our breaks, that such an important discovery would be made on the ground years later. It was in May 2022 that I wrote to Dr. Ruth Johnson expressing hope that something of archaeological significance would be discovered on the side of this hill overlooking the Liffey Valley. I wish to acknowledge with gratitude the help and guidance of Dr. Ruth Johnson in organising tonight's event. Dr. Johnson is the Senior City Archaeologist for Dublin City Council. In that role, she's responsible for the protection, management and promotion of the city's archaeological heritage. Former curator of Dublinian, she holds a BA in the Institute of Archaeology at University College London and a PhD in Medieval History from Trinity College Dublin. She's the author of Viking Age Dublin, co-author of Dublin, The Making of a Medieval City, and featured recently in RT documentary Fire and Blood, Vikings in Ireland. With Dr. Johnson, Ballyfermot's archaeological heritage is in safe hands. I'd like now to hand over to Dr. Ruth Johnson.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I'd just like to, first of all, thank a few people. And welcome you all, obviously, on behalf of the project partners tonight, who are obviously Ballyfermot Heritage Group and the City Council. So welcome to elected members and to my colleagues, but most importantly to the local community who are out here before us tonight. It's absolutely fantastic to see all the blue jerseys as well, and see such a vibrant and active and genuine community interest in the heritage of this place, which is actually such a fascinating community. I know that firsthand because I lived down the road. So as Tom said, you know, this site really came to my attention back in 2022 when Tom contacted me by email. And it was a strategic housing development site, as you all know, and we all need housing so very badly in this day and age in the city. Heretofore, it wasn't recorded as a monument. It didn't exist on any of the statutory planning maps and tools that we use for, you know, screening planning applications. And it was one of those applications that went straight to the board, so it didn't come to Dublin City Council as an application directly. We were only an observer on it. Now that's changed now. We're back to the large residential development is the new act that superseded the SHD, and it's important because that means it's back with the local experts, decision makers, the local elected representatives, the local people are able to have much more engagement. Having said that, we're delighted to see the lands being reused and utilised for such an important purpose. We were very surprised then, the EIAR, which was really useful tool for screening the archaeology and cultural heritage estates, didn't really indicate that we were going to get the finds that we got on the site. So when the work started and the ground was broken and Antoine and his team moved in on behalf of Wynoland, it was really exciting to see them turning up all sorts of features and very tantalising, elusive and unusual thing in an urban context. We often deal with very small sites, infill developments, and we only get like a little window on the archaeology. This site is a large site, and we've got quite a large complex. And I'm going to obviously leave the exciting bit to Antoine, because he's the expert. But I think you're going to be wowed and excited and have millions of questions for what Antoine has to say. So I'd like to say thank you first and foremost to Ballyfermot Heritage Group for this initiative. We did give a pledge to give this talk also in the Dublin Festival of History as part of the Friends of Medieval Dublin Symposium, and that took place in October. But that's a different audience, and it's not a local audience, and I think this is really special to be here in Ballyfermot, right opposite the site today. I'd also like to thank the councillors for their interest in the site, because it's that connection, the connection with archaeology, and it makes it worthwhile. We can go off and scientifically record and cost a lot of money, spend a lot of other people's money effectively doing that, but the value of that is turning that information, that data into knowledge, and then disseminating that knowledge and letting people engage with that knowledge and bring it back to us and tell us what that means to them. So that's really fantastic. Now, to get on to the main order of the night, I'd like to introduce the director of the archaeological site, Antoine Giacometti. Antoine has been working primarily in Dublin archaeology, I think since the mid-90s. I think that's fair to say. He doesn't look old enough. But anyway, he's very passionate archaeologist, he's extremely experienced archaeologist. He's done some really important sites in Dublin. I'm thinking just off the top of my head, there's one in the Linties, in the Black Pits. It's particularly interesting. And if you want to see some of his work, you'll be able to read about it in the Friends of Medieval Dublin, which is an annual publication. It's very well placed, cost-wise, because it's supported by Dublin City Council, by the CEO. Specifically, he funds that publication, and that is the main vehicle we have for introducing or bringing the data and then into knowledge into the public forum. So Antoine has published in that. He is very generous with his time. He always gives talks locally, and I think he was recently somewhere else in the country giving a talk in the last couple of weeks, as well as on the Friends of Medieval Dublin Symposium. Antoine has his company is Archaeology Plan, and he has a large team, and they are very dedicated, experienced archaeologists, and they work so hard under very difficult conditions, but they're so passionate about the work that they do, and they're so knowledgeable, and it's lovely to share this information with you today. So without further ado, I'd like to say thank you so much to Antoine and his client for facilitating this, and sit back and relax and enjoy.
Thanks, Ruth. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Antoine, and I'm going to give you this talk. So, I've called it Exciting New Viking Discoveries, but the most important part of this title, Directors' First Impressions Before Radiocarbon Dates. So we're actually still digging on the site at the moment, and we don't have any radiocarbon data. So what I'm going to do is very quickly talk you through the process by which an excavation ended up happening on the site. Then I'm going to show you what we found so far, and then at the end I'm going to say what I think it means. Okay, and what I think it means will change a lot. Even I think yesterday I got a new piece of information which has changed my mind about one thing. So that's going to change, but what we found is still interesting no matter how you interpret it. And hopefully you'll feel like that too. So some people think that the way an archaeologist gets involved in a site like this, the builders are building a house and then they find a skeleton or an ancient find, and then they call in the archaeologist. But as Ruth explained, that's not how it works. Archaeology on this side in particular was embedded into the planning process from the start. This is, I just took a screenshot here. You can't read it, but it doesn't matter. These are a list of all the documents I've created for this site, just for the national monuments. And I've been creating documents, sending to the National Museum, Dublin City Council, and my client, Dwyer Nolan, all the way through. The first document there is 2020. It's the EIAR that Ruth points out. I can't really read that date. 7/05/2023. That's when we found the human remains on the site. So I had to notify the National Museum, National Monuments, Gardaí, and they came out. And at that point, we very quickly realised that was archaeological human remains, not more recent. And then we started a process of discussion with the client, with Dublin City Council, with National Museum. You know, what do we do with these remains? What's the best thing? Should we excavate them? Should we try to preserve them? And these discussions lasted really a year. And the last document on this is, can't even read, but something like a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, I notified the National Museum that we had completed excavation of the burials. That's a year and a half since they were found to when we finished it up. So the whole process is complicated. It's not just a matter of going out there, excavating it and leaving. There's a whole set of discussion and negotiation all the way through. Maybe a little helpful slide to show you. On the top left, that's when we start before planning. You know, as the client is planning this development, archaeology is part of that planning. And then we do testing and we realize, oh, there is something significant here. Before we proceed, what should we do? And in the parts that are less significant, it's easier and you can proceed. But in the parts that are significant, as we have here, you need to do more testing and then redesign. Me and the client, Dwyer Nolan, we ended up designing a couple of different systems of building. For example, floating a building above archaeological levels and piling in certain areas to see how we can preserve the archaeology. And each of these designs had to be presented to national monuments, the National Museum and Dublin City Council, and so on. So it's complicated and it takes a long time. I'm now at this stage. Preliminary report, which I have to submit my preliminary findings. I'm writing them at the moment. They'll be submitted by Christmas, and then I will then begin the process, which will take several years, of analysing the artefacts, dating the material, and it's only when that's done in a few years that we'll actually fully understand what it is we have. So that's the site. You are all familiar with it, I think. It's the former De La Salle School and Monastery. It's in the red box. I've got 3 colours there. So the red area is everything we've excavated so far. The blue area on the side is the part that we decided to preserve, and that's going to be under a park. And then the kind of on the left, the white area there is not started yet. So we will maybe do that next year. So you can see that we've only done slightly over half the site so far. I don't need to tell you where it's located. It's obviously in Ballyfermot, up near us now. So there you go. The topography of the site is very important, and I'm sure if you went to school there, you know how high up you are above, above the river and above the ground around you. This is a contour map of Dublin, a modern contour map, but it shows actually the medieval course of the Liffey before the quays were built in the existing contours. So the sea is over here, and there's two kind of tributaries coming into the Liffey on the south, the Pobble and the Camar. And then I've drawn these little dots. It's not very arty, but these dots are the size of 9th century Viking finds. And they're, in each case, at these confluences of these tributaries and on the slightly higher ground overlooking the river. Our site I've shown with 2 circles, but the important thing about our site, there's 2 things. It's on the highest land between the sea and Dublin, so it's the highest point. And also just past the site and at Chapel Lizard, the river changes. So if you were a ship before the medieval period, sailing down here, you have to park here. That's where you have to park because of the river. You can't sail past Chapel Lizard. The river doesn't work for that apparently. In the medieval period, there was a fish weir built at the bridge. And so in the medieval period, you could only go as far as Isle Bridge. But when that was built, I think around the 12th century, there were a lot of complaints about the monks for building it because they stopped the old route sailing all the way to Chapel Lizard. Not very clear, but this is a detailed contour map of the site that I've done, showing 2 metre contours. And the colours haven't come out very well, but the point really is that the architecture of the site is really following the contours, which are very dramatic here, and actually it looks very defensive almost, the way it's built, the steepness of it. We have an entrance to our site here. I'll show you more detail later, but that is the only easily walkable way to the river. So an entrance on the riverside in the only place where you can safely walk down to the river. Everywhere else is too steep. That's a view from one of the new buildings that they've built on the site towards Dublin. So you can't really see from that you're at a very high point in relation to the whole city, but you really are. And before all the buildings were built, you would have had an unobstructed view all the way to the sea. So we've been digging there for, I don't know, a year and a half, and we have a lot of things we found, but I'm going to simplify this and just talk about 6 things, which are the 6 most important things. So this is the entire site, the Salle School and Monastery, and I'm going to talk about the parish boundary. So that's this line. Then I'm going to talk about animal bone pits that you can see. Then I'm going to talk about 2 enclosures, and an outer enclosure is the larger one, and an inner enclosure is the smaller one. And then I'll talk about the burial ground, which is inside the inner enclosure, and the structure and cistern, also inside. So I'm just going to talk about those things. I'll try to only talk about those things. This is a 19th century map of Ballyfermot and Butcher's Arms. Our site is here. And this was a separate townland called Butcher's Arms. And the parish boundary is very curvy. So this is the parish boundary in green of Kilmainham. And it takes into, inside it is Kilmainham and Inchicore, but it also takes a funny curve around this townland of Butcher's Arms. This boundary is established from at least the, this is a 17th century map showing, it's not curving, shows the same boundary. This is established almost certainly from the late medieval period as the extent of the ecclesiastical holdings of Kilmainham, but possibly, I think our excavation will show that this curving boundary predates that. This curving boundary we spotted back when we did the EIAR, and you can really see it if you're driving from Dublin on that Ballyfermot Road, if that's what it's called, past the school site. You kind of go uphill, and then you take a big curve at the top of the hill, and it's that curve which is interesting, and I think represents a very large outer enclosure, about 400 metres in diameter, surrounding the site. The other two enclosures, so that's the parish boundary. Then there's another two enclosures. So there's the outer enclosure and the inner enclosure. We excavated part of the parish boundary. Most of it is under the football pitches, which we haven't done yet. And inside it, we found only 19th century material because it's been reused in the 19th century as a boundary. We didn't find the earliest phase of that boundary yet. The outer enclosure is this one. This is still very big. It's 115 metres in diameter. You can see we haven't excavated this part because that's a different site. The outer enclosure, I'll show you photos to get it so you get a sense of what it looks like, but it's a big ditch surrounding the site with an entrance in the north. And artifacts we've got from it include a 9th century lead weight, a late 9th century coin called a styka from Northumbria, York, small iron knife or blade, and some medieval pottery, so 13th or 14th century. There was also a burial here, can't really see, a tightly flexed juvenile, so that means it was curled up in the entrance just left as you enter. This is something we see on quite a lot of Irish sites from the early medieval and also later medieval period. The styka I'll come back to, very significant, and the lead weight I'll come back to. So this is before radiocarbon dates, but as you can see, we're really lucky. We've got very clearly datable material from the outer enclosure, from the middle fill. The later stuff from the top is relatively normal. The ditch stays in use. We don't know when the ditch was dug from these artifacts, but we know it was open or half open in the 9th century. Then the inner enclosure, which is this one, okay, that's smaller, but still not what I'd call small. And the finds from the central fill of this are, again, another 9th century coin, so this is great. It links them together and gives us a date for when these things were open. A very large volume of Viking-type metal objects, lignite, which is a kind of stone they use for jewelry, spears, several keys. I had no idea when I started this, but keys are a real Viking thing. I'll show you. And human remains with burning. Nothing in the inner enclosure was obviously pre-9th century or obviously post-9th century in terms of artifacts. Okay? I'm just trying to present this to you kind of very objectively before I tell you what I think it is. This is a photograph. It's a drone footage during the excavation. Wish I had more of these to show you actually, because they're much better. This is the outer enclosure being excavated, and I've drawn a line here to show the parts that we finished and then handed over to the developer. This is the inner enclosure here. And you really do get a sense of this steepness, don't you, down to the road and down that way. This is the outer enclosure ditch being excavated by the archaeologists. So you can see it's fairly big. It's that deep and fairly wide. This is not the whole ditch. When it was first dug, we'd have lost maybe at least, say, half good bit higher, so the ditch is wider and higher. So this is a fairly big ditch, but it's not huge. Some sites in Ireland, like Clonmacnoise, Kildare, big religious sites actually have larger ditches, 4 metres deep and 4 metres wide. This isn't like that. It's more like 3 metres deep and 3 metres wide. But it's very, very large. And it's got a lovely curve, and you can see it. That's the inner enclosure. This is much smaller. Inside you can see, you can almost get in and out quite easily. But we've actually lost more of this. So we've probably lost, in some places, 1 metre of this ditch. When I say lost, I mean lost through years of ploughing when it was fields, quarrying, and also lost when playing pitches for schools, all that, and gardens were being done. So it's reduced the ground. The ground's been levelled. I suspect that when this was in operation, the site would have been much more hilly, much more dramatic, and then it's been, in more recent times, more levelled out. So that's one of the main reasons this ditch is much lower. But you still get a sense of it there, and it's excavating it. That's the 3 enclosures. This is a distribution pattern of the animal bone we found on site. So the animal bone is very interesting and very important. We have more animal bone from this excavation than I've ever seen in any excavation in Ireland before. Extremely unusual amounts. And the reason it's unusual is because we don't have any houses. So we have a huge amount of animal bone, but no houses. Normally, when you dig, say, in the centre of Dublin, you get a huge amount of animal bone because people were living there. But here we've got a huge amount of animal bone and not a single house. The main ways archaeologists interpret these kind of weirdnesses is you say it's some kind of temporary settlement. Either camping, if you camp somewhere, you might produce a lot of animal bone from eating and not build a house. Festivals, pilgrimage, anything where a lot of people come together briefly and then leave will produce this extremely unusual amount of animal bone and no house pattern. But it's very rare in Ireland. And our animal bone is only in very certain places. So it's in the parish boundary, which is fine because that we know is in use in the 19th century. Then it's in lots and lots of pits. These are all in red here. And they all stop at the outer enclosure. There is no animal bone in the outer enclosure. And then there's loads of animal bone in the inner enclosure and nothing inside here. So it's very spatially organized. I haven't got the breakdowns of what bones are what yet, but I think that's going to be very interesting to see. If horse is one place and cow is another place and so on. These animal bone pits are very, very unusual. We're digging one of them there. They are pits that are about 1 metre wide and 1 metre deep. Some are round, some are square, and they have vertical sides and flat bases, and they're packed with animal bone. And there's loads of them. Very few artifacts, 2 artifacts. One, this bronze gilded pin, late first millennium date, by which I mean 8th, 9th, 10th century. And then a bone pin, which is also the same date, and matches an identical bone pin, and I'll show it to you later, in the inner enclosure with the 9th century stuff. So these pits could be 9th century, or a bit earlier, or a bit later. We'll know when we date them. But they could represent the organized deposition of feasting or eating in a very large area. That's what it feels like. We've also got some, I won't dwell on this, we've got some interesting metalworking. We've got 2 metalworking structures. There's working on iron and working on non-iron, so like bronze and copper and things like that. We've got some serial drying, which is what what you need to do if you want to brew beer or make bread. We've also got some antler working, bone comb making, bead making, a couple of little crafts, all around the outer enclosure mainly. Still finding out. We only discovered the comb making a little while ago. Okay, so inside the inner enclosure, we found a structure. Now, this structure is very, very hard to see on this, but it was also very, very hard to see on the ground. Actually, the only good image we got of it was when we had just stripped. So we've stripped down to the archaeology. This is a drone shot. This is the outer enclosure ditch. You can see it, it's actually very clear. And here is the structure. And it was very clear for like a day. But it was a shadow of a structure on the soil. And as soon as we started to excavate it, it disappeared. It was only that deep. And there was nothing in it. We were just at the bottom. This had been so truncated in the past that it was a miracle we even got that. But the shape of it, so we don't know the date, and we won't know the date. The shape of it is very unusual in an Irish context because it has rectangular rounded corners. That kind of shape is usually associated with Viking houses, but this is not a house. There's nothing housey about it, and it's located inside the burial enclosure, right next to burials. So I've had a look at parallels. This is a structure they've interpreted as a house, and I'm not sure if that's correct. In Woodstown, which is an important Viking site in Waterford that they tested but never ended up excavating. They moved a road. And this one is very similar in dimensions. I'll overlay them. There was just one building in the Longford that is a very close match to our one. And then I've looked at some Norwegian examples of houses in burial mounds. They build mortuary houses in Norway in the 9th century. I think the idea is that you, when someone dies, you place them in the house for a little while and then you move them to a grave. And so I've been looking at that, but the Norwegian examples have rectangular ones. There's our house in relation to the inner enclosure and the burials and the burial mound. So it's over here. There's also a cistern, a well for water, undated, but probably contemporary, perhaps related to using water in the burial route. And this is the Woodstown house here. And when I made them both face north and made them the same scale, they overlay very, very well. So I think this is a very good example of for what we would have had here before truncation. But either way, our structure is a non-domestic, probably funerary structure of uncertainty. There's an entrance here, a later entrance admittedly, that's leading towards the structure, and on these red stars I've shown you the 3 Viking spears that we have found. Now, I must say, this one I discovered today might be a knife with a ring, so that would change. But there are 3 Viking spears that seem to be around this structure, which I think is significant. So I think it's likely that this structure has something to do with Viking funerary rites. So these are all the human remains on the site, so far, admittedly, but on the site. The outlying ones we have, I've discussed this. This is a very curled up juvenile. This burial here actually runs below the boundary wall of the De La Salle school. And we couldn't excavate it because to do so we have to dismantle the boundary wall. So that's actually preserved under the ground still today. These are 2 outlying ones. Each one seemed to have its own little mound, so they might have been visible above the ground as little mounds, and they're either side of an entrance here, but we never found an entrance here, so I'm not sure how that worked. All the burials in the ditch are disarticulated, and that means they're jumbled up and put in the ditch. They're not buried as a person. So we don't know if they were buried somewhere else and then taken up and put in the ditch, or if they were, I don't know how they got there, basically. But one of them was heavily burnt. But what we did notice is that, say, in one area of the ditch, say here, it was jumbled up, but there was one human skull, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 pelvis, so it was all one person. They were just jumbled. And here, the burials are buried in a burial mound. This is the densest area of burials, and here they're buried in graves. The burials got denser towards the east. This is fairly typical in the early medieval period. Especially from the 7th century onwards, it becomes very normal to bury more people in the east. That's where people want to be buried. And that's the area we decided to preserve, and it's now going to be a park. So we were able to preserve 200, and we excavated 100. That's a mess. Zooming in to the 100, you can see the individual. I don't know. Oh, that's a later field then. You can see it a bit better there. There's at least 2 phases we were able to discern. Again, I don't have my dating yet. The earlier phase was organized in rows. The graves were earth cut, they're not lined, so there was no evidence for coffins, no evidence for stone. Some of them do have little stone placings along the grave, but usually these are very simple graves. The most important thing about this burial ground is that the burials in general, they do not go east-west, normal burial like you get in a lot of early Christian sites. So these burials, the majority of them were atypical, is what I'd say. So either they're going north-south, or they're buried with their tummy down in the ground, or they're buried with their bangs tied up, or they're facing a different direction. They're just not what would at the time, assuming these are broadly 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, which I'm pretty sure they are, then they would have been considered atypical at that time. A pattern of atypical burials is often, well, when you excavate a Viking campsite in, say, England, most of the burials will be atypical, because not all Vikings were Christian. Some of them were, a lot of them weren't. And so this pattern might tell us that these people aren't all Christian. There are children, men and women here, which is not unusual for if it were Viking, because in the Kilmainham Iron Bridge burials, we know there's children, men and women there. Grave goods are rare, but they are there. It says Cone 7th, 8th century. That's actually been redated now. It's now definitely a 9th century cone. So one of the burials has a 9th century cone. It's not normal for Irish Christian burials of the 9th century to be buried with a cone. That would be something more associated with a Viking coming into Ireland, not Irish. And we have a glass drop or bead, and we have a Viking spear in one of the burials. So this is just a zoom in. Now you can't see it, it's not very clear, but this is a zoom in just on part of the burial ground, showing you the location of some of the finds. And I've just highlighted 2 of the finds there in my red box. because one of them is, and these do not come from graves, these just come from the grave man. One of them is an elephant ivory cap, which I'll show you, which is Roman, and another one is a Roman copper coin up there. So both of those are late Iron Age artifacts. Both of them could have come in to Ireland in the 9th century. I suppose it's possible, but I would think it's more likely that these represent Iron Age use of this site before the 9th century. Here are some of the burials that we've excavated. The one on the left, he's on his front, so he is the wrong way around, really. The one on the right, that's a north arrow. His head is to the north, which is not the way Christians are buried in Ireland. Just want to show you here the process of excavating. It's quite time-consuming. So we clean around the bone carefully, and then we record and document it. And there's a lot of little bones around the hands and the feet that we're trying to recover to get the entire skeleton and understand it. So it's all quite tricky. Here are some more examples. You can see that they don't look like they've been placed in graves with a shroud, you know, like contemporary burial grounds would. Contemporary to the 9th century, Christian burial grounds would. Artifacts. Most of the artifacts from the site came from a very small section of the inner enclosure ridge. This section, which not coincidentally is the exact, that's our structure here. It's all around the structure. And all of the yellow dots is an artifact. Now, all of these artifacts, well, you'll see in a second. And the green dots, I believe, are animal skulls that have been placed intentionally at the bottom. And there's another thing not showing up here, which is human skulls. So there's an intentional ritual deposition of localized human and animal skulls. Here you can see this is a later entrance, and someone's put an animal skull here and here. I think a lot of these are cow, but some of them are horse. So we're still fully understanding all this, trying to, but it's clear that there's been, in some cases, deliberate placement of skulls in this ditch, and in other cases, then we have higher up the human remains that have been bundled in on top. We don't know if that's deliberate or whether it represents destruction. Here are some of the artifacts we found. So on the left is, I didn't know what this was at all, the one with the holes, but it turns out to be antler bead making waste. These photographs are all from the site, so in some cases the artifact hasn't been cleaned yet. This is a bone comb we found with the one of the burials. It fell apart. We might be able to put it back together. This is 9th century. It's got bone, antler, and iron rivets, so we know it's 9th century. Apparently, this is a lid, and actually, when this was found, I thought it might be modern because it almost looked like plastic, but it is in fact elephant ivory, and they can tell it's elephant ivory. Don't know how they tell from I don't know, the marks, the way it breaks. I don't know, and it's handmade, and you don't really get these in Ireland. You get them in Rome and Roman influence places. I think this is probably representing trade with Roman Britain. This is that key I was talking to you about in the top left. So we have a number of these keys. They don't look like keys to me, but apparently they are keys. That's after conservation. Yeah, we got lots of them. And then these are buckles on the right. These are iron buckles that have been conserved. We have quite a lot of buckles now. This is just a sample. Here are the bone pins. The bone specialist looked at these the other day and said that one of them was used upside down, kind of hit things maybe to make leatherworking or something. They're currently analysing these, but one of these was from the animal bone pits and one from the inner enclosure. These are that's a loom wig, like a reba, and a whetstone pendant. So these are just everyday, ordinary things people in the late first millennium would have. But this is rarer. So these are not normal to find in Ireland. These are lead weights. And there's kind of a small window where these are being used in Ireland. It's when the Vikings come in and start trading, but before they're using coins. So you've got this kind of small window, and we know then that these are probably 9th century. And so we've got a number of them, and you only really get them in Viking times. So in Ireland anyway, and in England I think too. So that's one of the key signs that we might go back in count is these lead weight. The one on the right isn't a lead weight, I don't know what it is, it's a piece of lead. And we have lots of funny bits of lead that, I don't know, maybe they're the remainder manufacturing these. This is, I apologize, a terrible photograph of the coin of Emperor Constantine from about 330 AD. So I'll get a better photo at some point. Here on the left are lignite manufacturing waste, not beef. This is the waste for making bracelets. And we found a bracelet as well in the burial mound. So lignite is like a really hard coal, and you can carve it into jewellery. It's used in the late first millennium. Here on the right, I've been just showing you, we actually take all the rusty metal artifacts we find, we x-ray them in the National Museum, and it sees what's underneath. So we have loads and loads of these x-rays to see, it helps us interpret them. And there's weird stuff like, what's that? You don't know. This is a really nice artifact. A specialist from Belfast thinks that it might be horse related. So something, part of a harness or something like that for a horse. And you can see it's been decorated. And that decoration is very similar to another artifact. I'll show you in a second, but these are the stikes. So these are the only stikes found in Ireland. Stike is a name for a coin from York. The one on the right is debased, so it dates to about 860, where you weren't expected to read it. But the earlier one says Ethelfed II, and it's earlier, maybe 840 or 850. So these coins are really useful for dating, but they're also very interesting. Like, why is Ballyfermot the only site in the whole of Ireland with stike? Like, I think that's a very interesting question. There are analytic connections between Dublin and York. So the annals talk of a Viking king coming from York to raid Clondalkin in the 850s. So one of the questions is, how far do we interpret these coins and try to make the annals fit the evidence? It's an interesting question, but I haven't answered yet. This is the other decorated metal artifact that Ruth Johnson's been looking at. She's identified as Viking, and she's comparing it to a Viking hoard in Kilkenny. It's very similar compass and line decoration to the last one, so they might both have been made by a similar workshop. This is from the belt. So you can see, this is pre-conservation, all these aside. Here are two of the three spears. So finding spears is quite exciting because it's a weapon, it's always great. And the Viking weapon specialist has examined these and says that they are Viking type, which means broadly 9th century, which is good. The one on the right is the one that was found as a grave good in the burial. the one on the left and the pieces of broken spear that you can barely see at the bottom were found associated with the burnt, disarticulated human remain in the ditch. And the third spear, which I now think might be a knife, was found in a very unusual skeleton just south of the structure. This burial was on his own. He was face down, he was face up, but the knife or spear was embedded in his ribs, and he had bird bones around the skull. So we don't know. I thought it was a spear, but now it seems it was a knife, a very long knife. And there's also a ring. That's all I can tell you, a ring, that's all I know. A ring inside his ribs, metal ring. So, don't know anything more, just found that out today. Oh, that's just the location of those three artifacts in relation to the structure again. To remind me to say that. That's the burial with the spear. Can you see it? This is the spear. So he's been intentionally buried with the spear. These kind of burials with weapons are sometimes called warrior burials. That's not a great term. Sometimes they're women, sometimes sometimes they're very young, and sometimes the weapon is not necessarily indicating that the person was a warrior. But we call them, I think we're supposed to use the term furnished Viking burial. This is a Viking spear, and it's very likely to be a Viking person buried there. So that's the site. So I'll tell you what I think it is now. So the architecture of the site is very unusual. This is our site here, this one. This is showing the inner and outer and parish enclosures. So I've taken this is, in archaeology, this is a really famous diagram. It shows the largest and most important Christian sites in Ireland. Armagh, Clonmacnoise, Kildare, whatever. Those ones. And these are colossal sites of great significance and religious centres for thousands of years. And oddly enough, our very weird architecture at Butcher's Arm really is quite fitting into this pattern of architecture. However, we are not an ecclesiastic site. We don't have a church. We don't have a mosque. And there's no historic references to a church here. So I thought it might have been at one point, but now I'm adamant that this is not an ecclesiastic site. So I've been looking elsewhere. There are some, in Ireland it's rare, but there are some sites that aren't church sites, that look like church sites from the beginning of the first millennium. I've said not there. And these sites tend to be near church sites, and that's interesting because our one is near Kilmainham, at the edge of Kilmainham. They're also located at the edge of ecclesiastic land, and they mirror the overall architecture of the ecclesiastic site without being an ecclesiastic site. And that, I think, is a better way to interpret it. And so, despite all the evidence being Viking and not finding anything pre-Viking, I think this site is pre-Viking. And I think it probably begins in the late Iron Age and is used for burial, but non-ecclesiastic burial, in the 7th and 8th century. Archaeologists have terms for these sorts of sites, and they do come up again and again, and our site does match well, except for the fact that all our dates are 9th century. The most important thing about our site is it's not a residential site, so it's not someone's house or someone's home. It's far too big and far too significant. So that's a comparison of the architecture and site type of Irish known sites. I can't compare the architecture to a Viking camp because each Viking camp is different. However, there's a pattern of Viking camps taking existing sites at the edge of ecclesiastic land and building a camp there. There's a couple of reasons why they want to do this. When they put a Viking camp in a place, they want access to lots of food. It's an overwintering. They need a good supply of food. So if they go somewhere in the middle of nowhere, they won't be able to get that. They need it ready for them. So the way, the best way to do that is you put a camp near a bustling, important religious institution. You can then do a bit of raiding, a bit of fighting, but not too much, because you want all the trade and animals and everything. And then you can use that as a base to do more raiding elsewhere. So in that sense, the location of this site would be ideal for a Viking camp. There's been in the literature a kind of a search for the Viking Longford. Where is the Viking Longford? And I think with this evidence in particular in Ballyfermot, what we're seeing is that this search for the Longford is maybe a bit wrong-headed. The Longford is perhaps better visualized as a string of interconnecting camps all along the river, from Temple Bar to Ballyfermot. But probably not extending beyond, because you can't really sail beyond. So we've got different factions or different dates or different types of Longford all along. So, so there you go. Camps. So I should say that the kind of site I was talking about here, these very Irish, non-residential, non-ecclesiastic ritual sites, these are characterized by huge amounts of animal bone but no houses, because people are gathering for festivals. They're also associated with the fattening up of cattle and the creation of lots of cereal for festivals. So, an ideal place to build Viking camps. But camps are also characterized by huge amounts of animal bone and no houses, so it's hard to know which of the two interpretations to go with. I'm going for both. And then the diversity of burials, I think, is a clue that some, at least, of our burials are Viking. The question is, do we have the pre-Viking burials too, as I suspect, or are they all Viking? That is something we don't know. We won't know until we get the dates. So, to conclude, so I think architecturally we've got a non-ecclesiastic, what's called a cemetery site, burial or assembly site. So this is an assembly site that would have been at the edge of Kilmainham. And it's probably earlier than Kilmainham religious site. And as Kilmainham was being developed in the early medieval period, they would have allowed this kind of pagan older site, associated perhaps with kingship, to survive. I didn't mention, if there's no time, but we do have late Bronze Age burial activity on that site. I mentioned the late Iron Age. So this is sort of an ancient Irish site that predates Christianity, that was then taken into the overall lands of Kilmainham and became part of the broader Kilmainham land holdings, Kilmangan, the ecclesiastic site, in the first millennium, and then in the 9th century, it was ideal to use as a Viking camp. And it seems that most of the artifacts that we have, and perhaps most of everything we've excavated, belongs to this 9th century phase. And rather than being the Longford, it's part of the Dublin Longford. One of the really interesting questions is the possible evidence for Viking ritual activity. This is something I want to look at more, especially in terms of if I'm right and this was a sort of a ritual site before the Vikings, how interesting, are they using it in a similar way? Is there some continuity of use? Is there some respect for what was there before? We do see that on some other sites in England. So it's interesting because, of course, who are the Vikings? They're not all these Scandinavians who come over to raid. They're actually a motley crew, including Irish people and Scottish people and Welsh people, who would know the significance of an important site and actually have feelings towards it. So it's complicated, and maybe this site in Ballyfermot can answer some of these questions that we've never had a site like this. The significance of the Northumbrian Spica, I think, is very important. I think it's very important. But it's hard to know. Maybe it's just somebody lost 2 coins in 2 different ditches one day, and maybe it's not meaningful. But maybe it is very meaningful. So these are the things that I need to talk to a lot of people, do a lot of research, and try to discover how to understand it. And then my big question that I'm working on at the moment for my report is, how did the Viking camp end? I mean, at some point it stopped being a Viking camp. Did the Irish come and raid it? Did the Vikings just leave? How do we interpret the disarticulated, burnt human remains and broken spears in the ditch? Is it some kind of termination by Vikings as they are leaving? Is it some destruction of the defensive encampment by the Irish? How do we interpret that? And of course, the dating will be critical. Really good dating will help us to build up a picture and to answer some of the questions I've got about it. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Antoine, for that really interesting and very, very clearly presented talk about the site. I'm sure there's millions of questions, so I'm delighted to say we do have time for quite a few questions before we have tea and coffee. But just before I move into the questions, I just want to do a big shout out to Anne and Anne-Marie here in Ballyfermot Library. It's a fantastic space, and it was quite short notice when I asked if we could have this space, and they couldn't have been more helpful. And thank you to everybody here who's helped tonight make it such a success. So now I'm going to hand over to you and take some questions for Antoine from the floor. So if anybody has questions, please fire ahead.
It's probably an early stage, but I'm just wondering, will this be marked, how will it be marked for generations to come? He won't put a building over it, will he? Or?
So the park has been created on the area of the most dense, and that hasn't been built yet. And I haven't actually discussed with my client the plans for marking it, but I'm certain that Dwyer Nolan will be very happy to mark it in some way. So, first I have what I want to date, especially are the human remains and the animal world. And to date them, first I need to the dating is destructive, so I need to fully analyse the human skeleton and the animal skeleton. That will take at least a year. So we'll be doing that for a year, and then we'll start dating. We might fast forward a date or two, but really I want to wait because I've got a limited budget and I want to make sure that every date counts. So there are certain skeletons, if a certain bone here survives, you can do DNA analysis. And Dublin City Council said they might do DNA analysis, but they'll do DNA analysis on a dated skeleton. So I want to make sure I'm dating the one. So just to make sense, because it's quite expensive to date. So it's going to take basically longer than I would like.
So would that encampment, would that stop there, or would it have gone into the wider area where the rest of the village would be, like over that space in it?
This is the big question. What I can tell you about that is that the animal bone pits appear to be restricted to the parish plan. So if the animal bone pits reflect the Viking camp, then it stops at the road. doesn't go, because excavations on the other side of that road never found that anymore. So if that's what
Was
the
there any excavations done back in the 1940s?
no, that's
1940s, like, yeah.
no, but there have been archaeological testing in the wider Ballyfermot area, and no one's ever reported a animal. So they
But
see.
the wider Ballyfermot area is not right across the road
Oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean it could.
from the falls, like.
Yeah, it could.
Interesting.
It could. And certainly we know that the 9th century Viking camp extended to Temple Bar and is in Temple Bar. We've got similar stuff in Temple Bar. So there is, there's a couple of different hotspots, but we do seem to have a particular concentration here at Dallas.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it domestic animals or?
That's what I have to be told. For me, it just looks like cow, and I can't tell. But if it's a cattle at that date, it's bound to be domestic. There's also horse, quite a lot of horse, I think, and I mean, it must be domestic.
You were using the word parish boundary. If that's old or?
So it's the parish boundary of the 19th century is on the maps, and then it's also the same parish boundary of the 17th century, and that parish boundary is reflecting an older landholding of Kilmainham.
Is it religious? It's like Kilmainham,
It's-
part of that parish.
It's religious in that it was centred on the ecclesiastic. Well, actually, it's the late medieval. What do you call it? Manorial.
Yeah.
Manorial landholding. So it's a religious institution that owns Kilmainham in the late medieval period, and they are running quite a farming,
Grange.
well-organised grange. Exactly was the word. And I'm proposing to you that this landholding unit predates that and goes way back to the 6th, 7th, 8th century.
And you're saying that there was a long power down from it. Well, how did it get, which was forced? Was the weir there, which is forced rather than?
So the fish weir at Island Bridge, which stopped the movement of boats, was built in the medieval period in around the 12th century. And that is after the Viking Age, which is 9th century.
Yeah.
So in the Viking Age, you could sail across, no problem, and then in the 12th century, it stops.
Sorry, when that site was sold, or in Christian Brothers or whatever, did it include an archaeological build in that when he sold it off? Like when the builders came in, did they have a specific area set aside for an archaeological dig, or was it just by chance?
No, it wasn't by chance, but it wasn't just a specific area. So when my client acquired the site, presumably from the Christian Brothers, it was when my client applied for planning permission to build houses. At that point, the client had to also produce an archaeological report to go with them. Because it's such a large development, they needed an archaeological report to just assess. And so I wrote that report in 2020, and we recommended that we would do further testing to see across the entire site. And we did further testing across the entire site then, and then we started finding these interesting remains. And then it was a process of archaeological excavation. But at this stage, we're excavating everything. We're not, except for the areas we're preserving.
It's all the artifacts and skeletons have been removed from the site, have they?
Everything that wasn't preserved has been removed from the site.
And where would that be now?
So they're all in multiple locations. So what happens now is that the metal artifacts are being conserved in UCD. Then all the different types of artifacts go to a different specialist. So and there's lots of them. So a forensic expert in human remains will look at the human. A different person will look at the animal remains. An expert on Viking weapons will look at the spears. An expert on lead weights will look at the lead weight. You get very, very particular specialists. But this stuff is so unusual.
And do you reckon there could be more finds? Or do you think that's What's
So,
there?
certainly we intentionally preserved the densest area of burial. I'm pretty certain that in the area we preserved, there is below the Viking burials, there's like an Iron Age burial monument, and then an older burial monument under them. That's the area we preserved. That's the most significant. I feel, if you looked at my maps, I feel as we go away from that enclosure, we're getting less archaeology.
Yeah.
So if I'm right, we're not going to get that much more for the rest. But I could be wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
You just didn't answer my question. But when you're testing, when you're moving west, have you found anything that looks intriguing so far?
No. We have found animal evidence.
Okay.
But it is intriguing that there are no houses. And it is intriguing that there's nothing except for these animal bones. So that in itself is telling us something.
Would the houses be left over for that? Where the houses are built?
Maybe, but that's very far away from their waste. This waste seems to have been this.
Oh, it's not really far away. No, I'm not, they're back down the road. Where I am.
No one's knocking our house over.
It could be.
Do you think there'd be an opportunity to have anything on display in Ballyfermot, like in a year or two? Would you follow up with us? Like, would there be?
I would very much like that. Historically, the museum, National Museum of Ireland, who own all the artifacts, has not been that open to it, but recently they've been more open. So I think, what is it? I'd be enthusiastic.
I mean, we would be hopeful that that we'll be able to do something. Certainly, Dublin Council will be able to work with you and try and do some way of disseminating the information and marketing something locally. You know,
Information.
information. Certainly, we can offer that.
Yeah. You mean the artifacts?
Yeah, maybe just a follow up in a year or two, and then maybe a display or.
Picture display.
Yeah. It might be more a picture display. I know that even as we were finding them, the museum wanted them immediately because they're of great significance.
They'd be too valuable to
I fear that's what the museum will think, and in a way they're right.
Sorry, we have down in Angel Street, there's all these illegal, and there's a glass floor, and down in Wardford, I think it's painted or going, and the glass floor, and now it's more solid with the walls. So there'll be nothing there to show because everything's taken away.
So as I said, we did make many different specifications for different buildings and how we could preserve it. I think that putting a glass floor showing burials is a bit odd, and I'm not sure that this particular archaeological site would have suited that. But we did look at so many different options, but we were thinking the best way to preserve them. And what we decided at the end was to build up the ground and make a park. That would be the most appropriate for a burial ground. And that was a discussion that took months and loads of meetings with everybody. So it was, but I don't think in this case the glass. I don't think it would be necessarily very respectful.
Well, there's a building, obviously you said in the playground, so there's no building, there's going to be no glass floor.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's true too. But we did consider all the options. Did you want to add? Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I think I'm delighted that you're asking that question because, that's been something that's been done more and more now in Dublin, where we actually are able to not just preserve something in situ, but to display. And I think in this context, as Anton said, because the find itself is human remains, we want to be respectful about that. And there's a big debate about whether you do display human remains, even if you see
you do with that making a big tourist place. impressive, you know. You can look down the grade in the car park and,
Yeah.
Yeah. But in this context, we found that, we were able to negotiate a good compromise between, obviously you need houses, and there was a planning commission, but we were able to negotiate a space where we could keep some of the most significant parts of cemetery intact in situ as a green space. I think it's a really, really good outcome for the site, but I definitely think it's some information, and this is going to be a live and emerging story. I think you'll see like plans. Even since I heard you speak about the site, you've got new information from specialists that have slightly changed your presentation. So it's going to be, a couple of years before we actually get to a story that we can settle in, but that could change as another cycle to get to as well. But I think there's more questions to you.
Was there any opportunity to have some sort of an archaeological dig next door with the site of the new apartments being built, small development, around the garage used to be on Ballyfair Road, where it's close proximity to what you're involved in there, the old Salle site there?
So I don't know, is the simple answer. If the planning had gone through ages ago, it's conceivable that nobody would have flagged archaeology as a big issue, because none of us expected to find something this significant. However, I think any planning applications in the future, near here, will be considered archaeologically much more seriously. This particular site got treated archaeologically from the start because of its large size.
Whether just to say up in Park West, there was a number of remains found up there, so at the Park Point, Park West, my way back of the general common up there, and the whole site was stopped for a few weeks, and the excavated, they said they were people who had been buried and died during the plague in the 12th, 13th century. That's what they were carrying things to be done at that time.
Yeah.
We have one last question, and then I'll invite everybody to have a cup of coffee and a biscuit and let Antoine take a breath.
Is there any significance of the name that's been applied to the development to the big stone mound?
No. I'll come back to you on that. I suppose the mount is a bit appropriate.
I think the name of the actual stone then was to do with the quarries that were there.
Oh,
Because where
yeah.
was there,
That
and
makes
the back
sense.
there was a quarry.
Yeah, and we did find archaeological evidence for those quarries, and they were big quarries.
Just on that, the city council does have a mechanism for looking at placing, so I'll query that and find out, what
I think it was to do because of the area.
No, it was. We got it a few months ago. Yeah, absolutely. It was.
Yeah.
But look, I know everybody has questions, more questions about this, and I have more questions. But I think class 7 thought it will just say one last thank you to Antoine, to